Saga of Halfdan the Black. Chapter 1. Halfdan fights with Gandalf and Sigtryg. Halfdan was a year old when his father was killed, and his mother Asa set off immediately with him westwards to Agder, and set herself there in the kingdom which her father Harald had possessed. Halfdan grew up there, and soon became stout and strong, and by reason of his black hair was called Halfdan the Black. When he was 18 years old, he took his kingdom in Agder and went immediately to Vestfold, where he divided that kingdom with his brother Olaf. The same autumn he went with an army to Vingulmark against King Gandalf. They had many battles, and sometimes one, sometimes the other gained the victory. But at last they had agreed that Halfdan should have half of Vingulmark, as his father Gudrod had had it before. Then King Halfdan proceeded to Romerik and subdued it. King Sigtrygg, son of King Eystein, who had his residence in Hadmark and who had subdued Romerik before, having heard of this, came out with his army against King Halfdan. And there was a great battle, in which King Halfdan was victorious, and just as King Sigtrygg and his troops were turning about to fly, an arrow struck him under the left arm, and he fell dead. Halfdan then laid the whole of Romerik under his power. King Eystein's second son, King Sigtrygg's brother, was also called Eystein, and was then king in Hedmark. As soon as Halfdan had returned to Vestfold, King Eystein went out with his army to Romerik and laid the whole country in subjection to him. Chapter 2. Battle between Halfdan and Eystein. When King Halfdan heard of these disturbances in Romerik, he again gathered his army together and went out against King Eystein. A battle took place between them, and Halfdan gained the victory, and Eystein fled up to Hedmark, pursued by Halfdan. Another battle took place, in which Halfdan was again victorious, and Eystein fled northwards, up into the dals to the Hus Gudbrand. There he was strengthened with new people, and in winter he went towards Hedmark, and met Halfdan the Black upon a large island which lies in the Mjøsen lake. There a great battle was fought, and many people on both sides were slain, but Halfdan won the victory. There fell Guthorm, the son of the Hus Gudbrand, who was one of the finest men in the uplands. Then Eystein fled north up the valley and sent his relation Halvard Skalk to King Halfdan to beg for peace. On consideration of their relationship, King Halfdan gave King Eystein half of Hedmark, which he and his relations had held before, but kept to himself Thorten and the district called Land. He likewise appropriated to himself Hardeland, and thus became a mighty king. Chapter 3. Halfdan's marriage. Halfdan the Black got a wife called Ragnhild, a daughter of Harald Gulskeg, Goldbeard, who was king in Son. They had a son to whom Harald gave his own name, and the boy was brought up in Son by his mother's father, King Harald. Now when this Harald had lived out his days nearly and was become weak, having no son, he gave his dominions to his daughter, son Harald, and gave his title of king, and he soon died after. The same winter his daughter Ragnhild died, and the following spring the young Harald fell sick and died at 10 years of age. As soon as Halfdan the Black heard of his son's death, he took the road northwards to Son with a great force, and was well received. He claimed the heritage and dominion after his son, and no opposition being made, he took the whole kingdom. Earl Atli Mjove the Slender, who was a friend of King Halfdan, came to him from Gawler, and the king set him over the Son district to judge in the country according to the country's laws and collect scat upon the king's account. Thereafter King Halfdan proceeded to his kingdom in the uplands. Chapter 4. Halfdan's strife with Gandalf's sons. In autumn, King Halfdan proceeded to Vingulmark. One night when he was there in guest quarters, it happened that about midnight a man came to him who had been on the watch on horseback and told him a war force was come near to the house. The king instantly got up, ordered his men to arm themselves, and went out of the house and drew them up in battle order. At the same moment Gandalf's sons, Heimskringla and Helsing, made their appearance with a large army. There was a great battle, but Halfdan, being overpowered by the numbers of people, fled to the forest, leaving many of his men on the spot. His foster father, Olaf spake, the wise, fell here. The people now came in swarms to King Halfdan, and he advanced to seek Gandalf's sons. They met at Ade near Lake Oren and fought there. Heimskringla and Helsing fell in battle, and their brother Hake saved himself by flight. King Halfdan then took possession of the whole of Vingulmark, and Hake fled to Alfheimr. Chapter 5. Halfdan's marriage with Hjort's daughter. Sigurd Hjort was the name of a king in Ringarik who was stouter and stronger than any other man, and his equal could not be seen for a handsome appearance. His father was Helge Vase the Sharp, and his mother was Aslaug, a daughter of Sigurd the Worm-eyed, who again was a son of Ragnar Lothbrok. It is told of Sigurd that when he was only 12 years old, he killed in single combat the berserk Hildebrand and 11 others of his comrades, and many other deeds of manhood told of him in a long saga about his feats. Sigurd had 2 children, one of whom was a daughter called Ragnhild, then 20 years of age, and an excellent brisk girl. Her brother Guthorm was a youth. It is related in regard to Sigurd's death that he had a custom of riding out quite alone in the uninhabited forest to hunt the wild beasts that are hurtful to man, and he was also very eager at this sport. One day he rode out into the forest as usual, and when he had ridden a long way he came out at a piece of cleared land near to Hordaland. There the berserk Hake came against him with 30 men, and they fought. Sigurd Hjort fell there after killing 12 of Hake's men, and Hake himself lost one hand and had 3 other wounds. Then Hake and his men rode to Sigurd's house, where they took his daughter Ragnhild and her brother Guthorm and carried them with much property and valuable articles home to Hordaland, where Hake had many great farms. He ordered a feast to be prepared, intending to hold his wedding with Ragnhild, but the time passed on account of his wounds, which healed slowly, and the berserk Hake of Hordaland had to keep his bed on account of his wounds all the autumn and beginning of winter. Now King Halfdan was in Hedmark at the Yule entertainments when he heard this news, and one morning early, when the king was dressed, he called to him Harak Gand and told him to go over to Hordaland and bring him Ragnhild, Sigurd Hjort's daughter. Harak got ready with 100 men and made his journey so that they came over the lake to Hake's house in the grey of the morning, and beset all the doors and stairs in the places where the house servants slept. Then they broke into the sleeping room where Hake slept, took Ragnhild with her brother Guthorm and all the goods that were there, and set fire to the house servant's place, and burnt all the people in it. Then they covered over a magnificent wagon, placed Ragnhild and Guthorm in it, and drove down upon the ice. Haki got up and went after them a while, but when he came to the ice on the lake, he turned his sword hilt to the ground and let himself fall upon the point, so that the sword went through him. He was buried under a mound on the banks of the lake. When King Halfdan, who was very quick of sight, saw the party returning over the frozen lake with a covered wagon, he knew that their errand was accomplished. Thereupon he ordered the tables to be set out and sent people all around in the neighborhood to invite plenty of guests. On the same day there was a good feast, which was also Halfdan's marriage feast with Ragnhild, who became a great queen. Ragnhild's mother was Thorny, a daughter of Klaka Harald, king in Jutland, and a sister of Thyre Danabod, who was married to the Danish king Gorm the Old, and then ruled over the Danish dominions. Chapter 6 of Ragnhild's Dream. Ragnhild, who was wise and intelligent, dreamed great dreams. She dreamt for one that she was standing out in her herb garden, and she took a thorn out of her shift. But while she was holding the thorn in her hand, it grew so that it became a tree, one end of which struck itself down into the earth, and it became firmly rooted, and the other end of the tree raised itself so high in the air that she could scarcely see over it, and it became wonderfully thick. The under part of the tree was red with blood, but the stem upwards was beautifully green, and the branches white as snow. There were many great limbs to the tree, some high up, others low down, and so vast were the tree's branches that they seemed to cover her and cover all of Norway, and even much more. Chapter 7 of Halfdan's Dream. King Halfdan never had dreams, which appeared to him an extraordinary circumstance, and he told it to a man called Thorleif Spake the Wise, and asked him what his advice was about it. Thorleif said that what he himself did when he wanted to have any revelation by dream was to take to his sleep in a swine sty, and that it never failed to give him dreams. The king did so, and the following dream was revealed to him. He thought he had the most beautiful hair, which were all in ringlets, some so long as to fall upon the ground, some reaching to the middle of his legs, some to his knees, some to his loins or the middle of his sides, some to his neck, and some were only as knots springing from his head. These ringlets were of various colors, but one ringlet surpassed all the others in beauty, luster, and size. This dream he told to Thorleif, who interpreted it thus: there should be a great posterity from him, and his descendants should rule over countries with great, but not all with equally great honor. But one of his race should be more celebrated than all the others. It was the opinion of people that this ringlet betokened King Olaf the Saint. King Halfdan was a wise man, a man of truth and uprightness, who made laws, observed them himself, and obliged others to observe them, and that violence should not come in place of the laws. He himself fixed the number of criminal acts in law, and the compensations, mulcts, or penalties for each case, according to everyone's birth and dignity. Queen Ragnhild gave birth to a son, and water was poured over him, in the name of Harald given him, and he soon grew stout and handsome. As he grew up, he became very expert at all feats, and showed also a good understanding. He was much beloved by his mother, but less so by his father. Chapter 8. Halfdan's Meat vanishes at the feast. King Halfdan was at a Yule feast in Hadeland, where a wonderful thing happened one Yule evening. When the great number of guests assembled were going to sit at the table, all the meat and all the ale disappeared from the table. The king sat alone, very confused in mind. All the others set off, each to his home, in consternation. That the king might come to some certainty about what had occasioned the event, he ordered a Finn to be seized who was particularly knowing, and tried to force him to disclose the truth. But however much he tortured the man, he got nothing out of him. The Finn sought to help particularly from Harald, the king's son, and Harald begged for mercy for him, but in vain. Then Harald let him escape against the king's will, and accompanied the man himself. On their journey they came to a place where the man's chief had a great feast, and it appears they were well received. When they had been there until spring, the chief said, "Thy father took it much amiss that in winter I took some provisions from him. Now I will repay it to thee by a joyful piece of news. Thy father is dead, and now thou shalt return home, and take possession of the whole kingdom which he had, and with it thou shalt lay the whole kingdom of Norway under thee." Chapter 9. Halfdan's Death. Halfdan the Black was driving from a feast in Hardeland, and it so happened that his road lay over the lake called Rond. It was in spring, and there was a great thaw. They drove across the bight called Rikinsvik, where in winter there had been a pond broken in the ice for cattle to drink at, and where the dung had fallen upon the ice, the thaw had eaten into the holes. Now as the king drove over it, the ice broke, and King Halfdan and many with him perished. He was then 40 years old. He had been one of the most fortunate kings in respect of good seasons. The people thought so much of him that when his death was known and his body was floated to Ringerike to bury it there, the people most consequence from Romerike, Vestfold and Hedmark came to meet it. All desired to take the body with them to bury it in their own district, and they thought that those who got it would have good crops to expect. At last it was agreed to divide the body into 4 parts. The head was laid in a mound at Stein and in Ringerike, and each of the others took his part home and laid it in a mound, and these have since been called Halfdan's Mounds.